what is actually happening, what's it going to expect from each of us, and do we have the tools to be able to manage it moving forward? So we're going to have some slides that kind of flip through this as we go forward. There's about 9 shifts that we described that we feel as everyone should have at least a working knowledge of. We can have differences of opinions about how important those things are, but they are actually things that we need to somehow have some opinion on. So the first is a bipolar economy. We hear a lot about the fact that 20.9% currently in the United States control the wealth, 1% of the population controls 20.9% of the wealth. Now, what's even more startling is that since the recession, the Great Recession and the recovery that happened afterwards, that same 1% was able to accumulate 95% of what was recovered. 95. Now, we assume that, again, they lost a great portion of the wealth as well, but I don't think they lost all of it. So the fact that it keeps continuing to aggregate and get more and more polarized is an interesting phenomena. And it's not just in the US, it's also worldwide. Recently, Oxfam related a stat that 85 of the richest people in the world control the equivalent wealth of the 3.5 billion poorest people in the world. Now again, if you imagine that the poorest people in the world make $1 a day, us, we each would also have a significant amount of wealth, but not the same. I mean, again, that concentration and that polarization is kind of extraordinary, and it raises questions, right, about how did that happen, about if that's fair, and maybe should, or even could, it be redistributed in some other way. It also puts more pragmatically pressure on households, on businesses, on governments to kind of figure out now how to change their systems as a result of that. Whether or not it fixes or it doesn't fix itself, the fact is the world is different, right? We can't sell our products the same way. We can't necessarily think about the market as always having this really robust middle class. The next big shift then is the Internet of Everything, right? We hear about that a lot, but it really is kind of extraordinary to think that transistors will become so tiny and so cheap that they can be embedded in absolutely everything, right? From our lawn sprinklers, to our toothbrush, to our cereal boxes, to our pillows. I was actually having a debate with a futurist of Intel about the fact that he couldn't make my pillow any better than it is, and he convinced me that he could. Right? So if you imagine at some point it will be able to download what it is I've been dreaming about at night and somehow do some processing in the morning and tell me exactly what it is I'm most worried about or most excited about, I suppose they can make my pillow better. But those are the kinds of things that are possible, right? These things will become smart computers, and they will be able to literally gather data, process data, and spit it back at us in some pretty extraordinary ways. It makes life almost 100% quantified, right? And 100% optimized. Imagine that, right? So I start to think again about, what does that mean for privacy? What does that mean for ethics? And most of all, it makes me wonder about what will happen with the concept of surprise in a world that is algorithmically predictive. Right, in which we aren't actually making active choices. These things will often be actually made for us. How will that feel to be a human in a world that looks like that? The next big shift that I spend a lot of time thinking about is this radical shift in technology. The Internet of Everything is only one part of it, right? We're now moving into the land of 3D printers, robotics, bioengineering, the whole space economy, wearable technology. I mean, over and over again, we're being confronted by whole new ways of showing up, which then creates this mandate for constant disruption and constant change. Now, again, I spent a lot of time working with corporations and big CEOs who at one point, just a few years ago, asked me when this was going to stop. When does it stop? They've now come to grips with the fact that it's not going to stop, right? This is going to be a constant state of which we're a part. But I don't think they've actually grokked yet that this means that we actually have to show up differently and prepare for a space of constant disruption. So the next thing that they're thinking about, and we're all thinking about together, is this place of permanent ambiguity. Doug Rushkoff describes it as present shock, right? When we're in a space in which everything that we thought was true might be changing, might be upended, might somehow be shifting right underneath our feet. Things that we thought we could predict and count on are no longer necessarily true. We are in a place of constant learning and relearning. What does that mean? And how do we hold that, right? It's a society of constant uncertainty and a permanent state of flux, or what I will call infinite living, right? Sort of the endless now. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine via text one day, and I still like to say hi, text for a little while, and say goodbye. He was in a spot of just start the conversation, somehow end the conversation. I'm not really sure if we're still in it or not. And I couldn't figure out the difference, and I realized I'm a narrative texter. I still believe in that old world. You're an infinite texter. For you, there's an constant, ongoing conversation. That is the sort of way society looks as well. Sometimes those two things don't necessarily fit well together. The next big shift that we spend time talking about, the good news is around this whole shift of infinite, right, is that we also then constantly have access to other people. We are not in this game alone anymore.